friends and fellow Earthlings and my fellow crew of the spaceship Earth. Welcome to Ask An Astrobiologist, the show that celebrates the science and the scientists involved in our quest to understand the nature of life. I'm your host, Dr. Graham, the cosmobiologist Lau, and we're brought to you by the NASA Astrobiology Program and SegaNet.org. Now, you might have noticed in the ramp up for today's show, not only do we have an all new season here in 2023, we also have all new music, all new graphics, new logos. A huge thanks to the artist Melissa Flower for developing this new set of logos for us. We hope that you're really excited for the show this year, just like we are. We have so much to bring you. It's now over 50 episodes. This is episode 54 of Ask an Astrobiologist, and it has been quite a ride. So with our new change in logos, we thought we'd bring back the original host from when the very first episode of the show started, and who handed off the hosting to me as well. Before we introduce that host, though, I do want to say a huge thank you to all of you who are watching now live, all of those who watch the recording later. Thank you to all of you for tuning in, for joining in this quest with us and learning more about the nature of life with us, and learning more about what all of these awesome astrobiologists do. We especially want to give a shout out to Debashri Das, who is at Deb_AstroNerd on Twitter. Deb shared about our show and got some engagement for it. And it's always helpful for us to have our ambassadors out there in the world sharing about the show, talking about the show, and asking questions for our guests. So like I said, today's episode is going to be pretty incredible. We are bringing back on the OG host of Ask an Astrobiologist to chat with me about his research, his work in science communication, his work as a businessman or business person, and doing entrepreneurship. And this is Dr. Sanjoy Som, who's rejoining me here again for Ask an Astrobiologist. Dr. Som is a scientist, an engineer, and social entrepreneur who's passionate about space exploration and astrobiology. And so welcome to the show, Sanjoy. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's so great to be back, Graham. Hello to you, hello to the team, and hello to all of you who are watching. It's such a privilege to be back.
That's so great to have you, Sanjoy. You have such a huge background from engineering through science, doing geochemistry, studying thermodynamics, and there's so much that you've done. I actually want to start the show, though, talking about some of your work as an entrepreneur in developing SegaNet and Blue Marble Space, and how you became an entrepreneur in your career.
Yeah, happy to talk about that. It was not something I really planned to begin with. When I was a grad student, I was very active in the space conference circuit. And I gave a presentation at the International Astronautical Congress where I was advocating that astronauts should wear a common symbol when exploring space. So, instead of their national flag or in addition to their national flag, wear a symbol that really represents humanity, because once they're in space, they're all ambassadors of planet Earth, first and foremost. And then, of course, representatives of their home nations, but first and foremost, they're ambassadors of planet Earth. So surprisingly, the talk was really well received. I got some really good feedback. And at the plenary session during that conference, there was some important head of space agencies that was giving a presentation. And during the Q&A session, somebody asked him, what flag should humanity return to the moon when humanity does, in fact, return to the moon? And he answered, all the flags of all the nations. So I giant facepalmed myself because that seems very impractical. But I still had the flag from my presentation of the morning of, which is just a picture of the Earth. So I rose my hand and somebody gave me the microphone and I said, well, what about this flag? I kind of showed it to everybody in the audience and to the speaker. And to my biggest surprise, the entire audience started clapping. It really resonated with people. So I went to the stage and gave him the flag. And once I got back home, I was thinking more about this moment because it's one of those few moments in life that kind of shake your soul a little bit. And I decided to see how far this idea will go. So I started Blue Marble Space as an organization, as a nonprofit, to push this idea. So to sell flags and stickers and patches, to promote a common symbol of international unity in space exploration. I wrote a paper that was published in Space Policy, which is still, I think, the only peer-reviewed paper that has such a symbol as a proposition for humanity. And things kind of took off from there. After finishing a PhD and a postdoc, I had a drink with my close colleague and good friend, Jacob Hack-Misra, deciding what do we want to do with our career. And we thought that starting a nonprofit that really focuses on the human aspect of science and science communication and getting people excited about science was something different that didn't quite exist yet, where science communication is really built into the fabric of the organization. And learned how to, do business with the government. And then I went to do business school while during my postdoc, evening classes, kind of learn the language of business, accounting, finance, operations, all that things, and then went for it. And here we are, it's 12 years later, and it's still going strong, and it's doing things that I could have never imagined.
No, I love it so much. And for our audience, if you don't know, I joined Blue Marble Space in 2017 after finishing my PhD and became the Director of Communications and Marketing for the organization. You can learn more about Blue Marble Space at bluemarblespace.org, as well as the Blue Marble Space Institute of Science at bmsis.org. And so it's interesting to see, this pivotal moment in your career. And I actually happen to have my flag patch right here.
There you go. Awesome.
of our Earth. And that moment where you shared that flag was like that precipitous moment in your life that kind of impacted you to make this big change and become a social entrepreneur and create an organization that, not only the scientists that we've served, but also so many young students now from around the world have been part of Blue Marble Space through the Young Scientist program, through the Visiting Scholars program, through various other opportunities that you've offered. I wonder if you can speak for a moment to your vision for how important it is to bring in younger scholars, younger researchers, and to mentor them to become scientists and engineers for the future.
I think it's the most important thing we can do. I mean, science is a universal language of our society. It doesn't matter what you believe, what language you speak, what the color of your skin is. Science brings us together. There's one way of understanding the world that provides progress to society. It's bringing these kids together from all over the world to work together for a summer, at least in our Young Scientist program, and bathe them in the spirit that by working together on common problems, the diversity of your opinions into how that problem should be solved enhance the quality of the work and the potential solution to address this problem. So I think getting more and more people from all over the world to do scientific research is going to bring humanity together. And by goodness, do we need that these days?
Absolutely. And I didn't mention in your introduction your background. You started off in engineering. You started off studying aerospace engineering. You earned your bachelor's in 2002 from FIT. In 2004, you earned a master's from University of Washington, also in the realm of aeronautics and astronautics. And then you made the switch over to doing geological sciences, planetary sciences, and astrobiology for your PhD at the University of Washington. I'm wondering, what intrigued you in making that switch from aerospace engineering, moving over to the sciences for your PhD?
It's again one of these moments that happen in your life that you didn't quite expect. So I was very happy as an aerospace engineer. I was doing a focus in fluid mechanics, that is the physics of air and water. And the department required taking classes outside of the department, but in the same general realm. So University of Washington has a fantastic atmospheric sciences department. So I signed up for a class in planetary atmospheres. And the professor for that class, Professor David Catling, is an astrobiologist. And I had never heard the term astrobiology, right? I discovered it quite late in my academic career. I was halfway through a master's before I learned what astrobiology was. And so he taught that class with that spirit, and that completely blew my mind. And I remember spending all my time working on the paper for that class, which was on the topic of water on Mars, and kind of not spending as much effort on the engineering classes. And that got my head turning. It's oh my gosh, this is what should I do? What should I do? Kind of had a quarter life crisis, I guess I could say. And then I made a decision. It's okay, ultimately you want to be excited about what you study. And this new field of astrobiology, because it's so much philosophical as well as rigorous, really attracted me. And so I decided to finish the master's and start a PhD in a discipline I knew nothing of. I didn't know anything about geology or geophysics or astrobiology. But I had incredible support from my mentors at the university there who believed in me. They didn't have to. I was really a liability when I first started. But they believed in me, and I'm still grateful very much to this day. And loaded myself with classes. I was finishing my master's while at the same time starting the PhD. Loaded myself with classes for 2 or 3 years. I was taking Introduction to Geology, as a freshman. Just really loading myself with classes, and I just loved every single one of them. It was just so interesting. So that made me realize I made the right choice, and just went from there. I still managed to finish in 6 years. It was a lot of work, but I don't regret it since. I think the background in engineering and the PhD in science gives me a niche in how I approach problems that's perhaps different than a lot of scientists. And it's been working out well for me so far.
I love it. And I can definitely sympathize too. When I first started my PhD in geology, I only had 3 undergrad courses in the earth sciences at that point, and so it was a slog. It was a lot to catch up. But but for everyone out there, you can make a change in your career. You're never stuck in one path or one direction. It's always up to you where you choose to meander in your careers. Sanjoy, I do want to talk a little bit about your research here while we have some time before talking a bit about the Ask an Astrobiologist show and its history and a bit more about you personally. In leading up to the show, you and I were discussing your research, and you said something that I really want to draw out here a little bit. You mentioned that part of your work is quantifying the concept of habitability. And I really want to hear you, in your words, explain what that means to our audience and the research that you do.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. It's funny because my postdoc had nothing to do with my PhD. I kind of like doing these things of like, I find a new something shiny, and the tools of science teach you how to solve a problem. Doesn't really matter what the problem is. Knowledge you can acquire and then solve the problems as it comes along. Quantifying the concept of habitability means that you essentially treat life like a light bulb. So in order for a light bulb to shine, you need to understand the electrical circuit that's providing energy to the bulb. In the same way, the environment provides energy to biology. So I do the same coupling, voltage and current, from the natural environment delivered to biological systems. So you can calculate, given what is dissolved in water, what the voltage is for biology. And it's important to talk about what's dissolved in water, because water by itself is kind of not habitable. It's really the energy that's provided by the stuff that's dissolved in water that biology can take advantage of. And that gives you the voltage. In terms of the current, you have to think about how that material gets delivered inside a biological cell. So in order to be quantitative about it, I'm trying to think of the simplest cell possible that delivers, rather uptakes into the cell from the outside via simple diffusion processes. Now that's the most simple way to think about it, because many biological cells, have active transporters in their cell membrane, and that complicates the mathematics tremendously. However, diffusion, we can all solve the diffusion equation. It's a well understood equation that can be tractable computationally. So you simulate the diffusion of stuff into the cell. So in particular, I'm interested in hydrogen and CO2, which are 2 very simple molecules that are neutral. So they basically don't see the cell membrane, just diffuse right through, which simplifies the math. And so you have to also think about, well, at what rate do the enzymes process the carbon or the hydrogen? And the rates are, there's a lot of studies on Earth that have assessed what those rates are. But thinking about astrobiology, that might not necessarily operate with the same rates. You kind of look at different kinds of rates, different kinds of cell size, because that affects the input of stuff in the cell as well. And so you can make these quantitative links between how to deliver the stuff that's dissolved in the water and how that stuff that's dissolved in the water gets absorbed by the cell. So then you can say, there's this much energy in the system. You can expect a doubling time based on that energy for these cells of this much, and eventually I would like to go from the energy of the environment to the potential biomass that it can hold. Working towards that, but right now it's really focusing on the electrical analogy of the environment for biology.
Awesome. And you've done work on systems here on Earth, looking at this, and these serpentinizing systems where water and rock are reacting together. But you've also then considered how this might apply to ocean worlds as well, to these oceans in places like Europa and Enceladus and these other worlds. I do know one thing about you, and it's something that all of the grad students at UW in astrobiology get to do, is to go on a submersible and to learn about ocean science. I wonder if you can talk about that for us and what that experience is like.
Yeah, happy to. It was definitely not something that all grad students got to do. I was very lucky. Part of the astrobiology program there, we have to do a rotation in labs that have nothing to do with our work. So I volunteered in a thermophile lab. So it was the lab of Dr. John Barros, who was studying how life thrives in warm and hot environments. And so amazingly, there was an opportunity to go on a cruise, which is a vessel that goes to a site of hydrothermal activity. And the vessel had, on that first time I went, had not Alvin, the submersible, but Jason, which is the ROV, the robot. And that was already incredible, in a control room, and you can see the pilots operating this robot live on the seafloor, and you can see these incredible vents coming out, and they're sampling and everything. And when that vessel came out, when Jason came back on deck, I had to rush to the boats and grab the samples and inject everything in my test tubes that were previously prepared to see what actually grew. And had a great experience there. I was invited back the following year on another cruise, which had Alvin, the submersible. And I was talking with the PI saying, I do a lot of communication, science communication, and one of my message is that it's really powerful to go into space because of this concept called the overview effect, and that kind of the realization that we're all kind of living on this tiny, small blue marble together, and we better cooperate if we are to want to get anywhere. But I didn't know how to express what it was like to be in space. So the closest thing you can be is actually in a submersible sitting on the ocean floor, because there's like a window this thick that separates you from certain death. And I was, of course, on the scientific crew of the boat. And so the PI, Jim Holden at UMass Amherst, allowed me to be part of the crew on one dive on Alvin. And so we spent 8 hours on the seafloor, great day to spend a day in the office, and worked to sample the different vents. And I have to say, like, seeing a vent in 3 dimensions with your own eyes as opposed to kind of 2D on a screen is a whole new emotional experience. The power that you feel of Mother Earth when you're down there. Similarly, when I did some work on Mount Etna, where I was sitting on the crater of the volcano and the whole thing shakes. Like, you also have this respect. So it was just really, really powerful. And so, spent eight hours on the seafloor collecting samples, waved at crabs who were waving back. Just a really, really incredible experience that I enjoy sharing about when I give outreach talks.
That's awesome. And there's so much to unpack there that we can talk about. I do want to come back around to this idea of like the impact of the person who's exploring and in the environment and learning about these things. But I want to come back to this idea of ocean worlds too. Like going down on the ocean floor, we're learning about Earth's ocean, but we're also learning about possible other oceans out there as well. Through the NASA Astrobiology Twitter account, which is at NASA Astrobio, we asked our audience where they think NASA should focus our search for life in watery worlds next. We gave the options of Europa, Enceladus, Titan, or Triton. Of course, people can always offer their own suggestions as well. But of the respondents, almost 50%, a little over 45%, said Europa is where we should target life. Do you think it's possible for a biosphere to exist in the Europa Ocean? And if so, can you envision what that might look like down there?
Yeah, I think it would be foolish not to think so, because our understanding of life is very terrestrial based. And if we think we're going to find Earth-type life elsewhere, that's just hampers your imagination. So chemistry is incredible. The energy that's released by water reacting with rock is incredible. That's certainly not limited to Earth. So there is certainly energy on the seafloor of Europa and Enceladus, and there was that kind of energy on the surface of Mars as well. And so there's a lot of possibilities for life to have somehow developed. Whether it's flourished, that I have no idea. But at least developed. Like on Earth, it seems like life developed really quickly when Earth and Mars are very similar. And, one of the theories for the origin of life on Earth is in hot springs in hydrothermal vents. And so it's plausible to think that such activity exists on Europa and Enceladus, and therefore the environment that could be necessary to start the basic chemistry is prevalent in our solar system. Now, the million-dollar question is, how do you go from like basic geochemical reactions to a chemical system capable of Darwinian evolution? That's like, I have no idea. But I think you need an environment that provides energy, that provides perhaps different types of settings. And so my personal bet is I think we have better chance of finding life in ancient sediments on Mars than we do on Enceladus, just because getting through that ice is going to be just a tedious work. We'll get there eventually, but not tomorrow. I think we have all the tools we need to make that discovery in our own solar system. And I agree. I think Europa would be a fantastic place to look for it. Let's not bias ourselves by what we know on Earth. Let's be creative. Let's not go into sci-fi. We have to do science, which is rigorous based on what we know. But nonetheless, let's really stretch our mind to think about life could look like in those worlds.
Yeah, I love it. Without imagination, science takes us nowhere. We need to be able to dream and think, but also apply the rigorous techniques and tools of science. And there's so much you said there that I could talk about for hours with you, and I have in the past. It's part of why we've been friends for so long now. I do want to talk about the show and its history, and you actually gave me a good little impetus there as well. You at first said these hot springs, and then corrected yourself to hydrothermal vents, but indeed, there are some people who think that maybe life started on the land around hot springs instead of in hydrothermal vents, or that life was brought to Earth from rocks from Mars or from Venus. There's a lot we don't know about what life is, how life functions, especially beyond Earth if life is out there. And so for me, part of the beauty of a show like Ask an Astrobiologist is that it brings together so many of us who are studying this realm, this realm of life from so many different angles, from geochemistry and oceanographic science, atmospheric science, engineering, those who are applying the humanities, trying to understand the spiritual aspect of our pursuit to understand the nature of life. This is now episode 54 of Ask an Astrobiologist. And so first, I'd love for you, as the original host, to give a little history of the show to our audience. And then I'd love to hear your vision of what this show has done and of your own time as a host as well.
Yeah, so the show started as a discussion between grad students about wanting to be more involved in science communication and sharing the excitement that astrobiology is. And so through Blue Marble Space, we launched this initiative called SegaNet, which was originally a platform. It was back when social media was cool, like Facebook was just starting and all this stuff. And so it was also its own social media platform where people could engage and to create the show, to create like a community of enthusiasts around astrobiology. So not necessarily just scientists, but anybody who's excited about it. And we tried different things to get people excited about the show. We had a mentoring program, which was really valuable, that kind of translated into the Young Scientist program at Blue Marble Space. And SegaNet started with, not SegaNet, Ask an Astrobiologist originally was called Talk to an Astrobiologist. And we had no budget. And so the way it was done is it was just a one-way stream between the person who was interviewed on the SegaNet platform, and the people, including the host, would engage with the person via chat. So the person was talking and reading the questions via chat. So it was clunky, but it worked. So like we did many episodes like that. And then in 2012, 2013, something like that, NASA approached us in wanting to support the activity with a bit of funding, with a bit of production help. Mike Toillion, our incredible producer who's still involved, got involved and brought the quality of the show to new heights. And that's where we started having the technology to go back and forth. Like internet bandwidth was improving to the point that we could have video going back and forth and being smooth. And it kind of grew from there, and you got involved and just immediately saw the talent that you have in science communication. And it was time, as Blue Marble Space was growing, my role as a business leader were changing. And so it was a good time to transition the roles. And you've all taken it to new stratospheric heights that I could not have myself. And so, it's been 10 years, I think, now for the show, which is crazy.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride. And we've had some really incredible moments along the way. We did ask on the NASA Astrobiology Twitter account some about people's favorite moments in the show, and we had a few responses. I mentioned when Hiroyuki Kurokawa was on and kind of enlightened me to the possibility that there could be, if there ever was life on Mars, ancient Martian life on the moon of Phobos that could have been blasted off the surface of Mars. We heard from people like Jen Blank and Mark Skidmore about the trials and tribulations of exploring in the field and doing field astrobiology. Morgan Cable from JPL joined us and talked about her hobby of mountain unicycling, which everyone really loved. We also had Natalie Battaglia join us. Some know her as an astrophysicist who's done a lot of work on our space telescopes, including now James Webb Space Telescope. One quote from Natalie when she was on the show is, "For me, I couldn't get interested in science until I could connect to the wonder of it all. And poetry did that for me." And so for those who watched that episode, you might recall that Natalie and I discussed poetry. She's been involved in something called the Universe in Verse, with Maria Popova of the Marginalian, where they share science and poetry together in a night of exploration. And we have some really interesting news to share on the show today that just was announced. It was just announced that the U.S. Poet Laureate Ada Limon is going to create a poem that's going to go to Jupiter and to Europa on the Europa Clipper spacecraft. We don't know what the message is yet. She hasn't written it yet, at least to our knowledge, but it'll be very cool to see what that poem becomes. And so maybe in the near future, we'll discuss this poem and the impact of sharing the poetry of exploration in space through Ask an Astrobiologist. And so there's been so much we've done in this show over time, from some of our bloopers, like just today, we had some technical issues in the show getting started, to in the past. Well, I remember, Sanjoy, when you were the host, there was a period where we had posters on the wall behind you. And there was one time this poster came kind of like folding off the wall from behind you right during the episode. We've certainly had issues during every single episode I've hosted as well. That's just part of the fun of live video, I suppose.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and these fun things happen. And so I kind of want to change a little bit before we open it up to the audience here and just hear a little bit about your personal story. I'd love to know a little bit about your background and really what got you inspired to be involved in space in the first place at all, or to be involved in engineering or science at all.
Yeah, so I definitely got interested in exploration before I got interested in space exploration. The first novel that I read ever was Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. And I became a Jules Verne fan. I read all of his books, Mysterious Island, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Five Weeks in a Balloon, of course, Around the World in 80 Days, and From Earth to the Moon. And that really got me thinking about the engineering aspect of exploration, all the things you have to think about to make long journeys. And then when I was around 8 years old, my parents offered me a little telescope. And through that, I saw the craters of the moon for the first time, the moons of Jupiter, the rings of Saturn. And it was like, what is going on? What is this world in the sky that I had not seen before? And so I grew up in Switzerland, and Geneva Observatory is fairly well known in the area. And they had a group for enthusiasts to join, to go look at actual real telescope. And I was by far the youngest participant there, by far, decades, in terms of participating in these evening shows, and they were late, 9, 10, 11. And, when I was 8, I got tired. But, mom came with me, and I saw the bands of Jupiter for the first time and the details. And it just absolutely blew my mind. So I knew I was interested in space. What aspects of space, I don't know. But I think this merger of this interest from Jules Verne and this astronomy kind of directed me towards aerospace engineering. My father worked for an aerospace engineering firm, so a lot of different factors that not necessarily related kind of guided my path in that field. And so that was not prevalent in Switzerland. Aerospace engineering was not a major then. It is now, but not then. And so in deciding where I wanted to go, I was kind of exploring, of course, the United States because of NASA. The reputation of NASA just transcends the reputation of the United States still today. And at that time, when I was deciding what to do in terms at the university, the first Swiss astronaut, Claude Nicollier, flew. And of course, it made the headline news everywhere. And I got to meet him a few days before moving to the United States. It was January 1999. He gave a talk in my village, and just wow, extremely inspiring person. Showed pictures about him in space, everything. Okay, this is it. This is what I'm doing. But I've always, kept an open eye about what interests me. I started my aerospace engineering master's in plasma physics because I was interested in advanced space propulsion. But there were difficulties in finding funding for me for my second year. So I started knocking on doors and found this opportunity in fluid dynamics and heat transfer, through which I got involved in planetary atmospheres, and then how I discovered astrobiology. So life is really not at all this linear path, right? You stay open to what happens around you. And even the postdoc only happened because I went to a seminar where my future postdoc advisor was giving a talk, and I was just blown away by his presentation, which had nothing to do with my PhD. But nonetheless, this is fantastic. And so really followed, learned, and was able to join his lab after a bit of convincing. Again, very grateful that he took the leap of faith with me. But we're still colleagues, 10 years afterwards. So it worked out. So just, I've always listened to what's exciting around me. I never felt fear towards stuff that seemed difficult because of community, because of people I live with, I work with, friends. You can do so much more with a group of people than the sum of the individual parts of the people. And so that's what's also motivated me to build this community of scientists at Blue Marble Space, just because the sum of what we can do together is just extraordinary, and so much more than, again, that we could do individually. So I'm disappearing in a tangent to your original question. I'm sorry, but hopefully that gives you a feel about kind of the path that I followed to where I am today.
Totally fine. I do want to get to our audience questions here soon. We did have a slightly late start on today's episode. I do, real quick, before we do our Faster Than Light segment, I would love to have you tell the audience a little bit about your work in watchmaking. So I know that you've made watches, that it's a hobby of yours. I'd love to hear kind of what got you involved in this side pursuit of making watches in your spare time.
Yeah, I've really always been interested in horology, so mechanical watches. I don't care much for quartz watches, but mechanical watches. And the hobby really started during the pandemic. I live in an apartment, so I didn't have a lot of space for hobby. Watchmaking is very small. So I first started by just buying a kit and started putting it together. And then I had all these visions about how to make the kit better. So they're all stainless steel watches. And then I found a local company in the Bay Area that industrially black oxidizes steel. So I showed up with my watch cases, and they were like, what? Like, come on, give it a try. You have nothing to lose. I'll take the cost fallout if it doesn't work. I'm just curious if it does. And it did. So I got these watch cases, beautifully black oxidized. I don't have the skills to build the individual gears and put them together. I buy the movements already built, which is good. So it means the quality of the watches that I have are all excellent. So there are movements that are been manufactured en masse. I'm no Patek Philippe, right? And so, but then I have a friend of mine she's a software engineer, but she's also an artist, and she does the dials. Really beautiful, very skilled painter. She's really good at painting birds. And then based on the dial colors, I choose what kind of watch hands I want, 2 hands, 3 hands, what color, maybe the same color, and then I assemble everything together. And so, as a business leader and as a scientist, my mind is all over the place during the day. And sometimes I just need an ability to just refocus the mind into a single task. And watchmaking, there's no way around it. If you're anxious or stressed or have your mind somewhere else, the hands are just not going to fit. So it's almost meditative. It's a meditative hobby, essentially. I think not that I think about it. Most of my hobbies are meditative. They just let the mind do its thing and just focus. And it's been a joy, then I started learning about the history of watchmaking, which is very interesting as well. And there's this other philosophical aspect that all the different pieces that go into mechanical watches are just rubbish individually. When you put all these pieces together, you have this intricate piece that tells the time very precisely. It's kind of my wish for every organization, where every person involved in the organization is one of those pieces, and then together they just work like clockwork.
Yeah, I love it. That's great. The Buddha said, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. And so for Sanjoy Som, it's before enlightenment and afterwards is to assemble the watch pieces. And I love that. I love it's very meditative for you. We are going to switch now to our Faster Than Light segment. I have a few quick questions. Each of them can be just short answers. 30 seconds to a minute. The very first one starts off with Enrico Fermi's question. So what is your favorite answer to Fermi's question, where are they?
My favorite answer is that they're watching us from above, looking at us and like, you guys are just not ready to be part of a community of intergalactic species. Sorry, keep working at it.
Love it. It's like Star Trek, right?
Exactly.
We're waiting for first contact. Okay, so here's a really fun one. And I know this one, I'm sure you have some great advice here because you have been so involved in the careers of others. If you could go back in time and visit yourself at the beginning of your career, what advice would you give yourself?
I would say don't settle too far away from family. So I left Switzerland when I was 19 to the United States for university. And at 19 years old, it was awesome, right? Finally, I have my own freedom to explore my own interests, understand who I am, what I want to do. And then because of life, I ended up settling in San Francisco, But now, in my early 40s, I have a little niece that I don't see very often, who's growing very quickly. My parents are getting old, and I'm not there to take care of them. And so, especially during the pandemic, and just with a parent that's ill, it's just, and the little girl that's growing, and I'm not there to be the uncle that I want to be. It's been difficult. So the advice is like, yes, go wherever you need to have a fantastic education, but come back closer to home to settle, because family is ultimately all you have when you dissect the world. And so for me, I wish I had settled closer to home.
I feel that a lot. I'm also very far away from family, and it can be troubling. Another question. If there is alien life out there, do you think we as astrobiologists are most likely to find it first here in our solar system beyond Earth, or out there amongst the exoplanets?
Oh, it's so hard. Now that James Webb has launched most exciting telescope ever, and its capabilities are just blowing everybody out of the water, it's really hard to understand to predict, I guess, what it will see versus the exciting Mars missions that are ongoing and the Clipper missions of the icy moons. I think it's a very fun race to keep up with, and who's going to detect anything first. The discoveries are going to be very different, and if they do make discoveries, it's going to be debated forever before we make the conclusion that it is alien life. Right? That's the last possible option, is that it's alien life. We have to go through all the different possibilities. You can't see something strange and be like, that's aliens. Like, no. You have to be extremely methodical. So even if we make an interesting discovery, the process of science will have to take its place, and it's going to be a probability at the end. This is highly probable that it is biology versus less probable that it's biology. It's not going to, unless we have a handshake or there's like a selfie on somebody on the Mars rover, is always going to be a little bit of a doubt. And that's okay. That's the process of science. We'll work towards answering it. So I can't predict if it's going to be in our solar system or not, just because like the instrumentation that James Webb has just deployed and the upcoming missions for our own solar system are all extremely exciting, with really powerful instrumentation. So I'm going to love just reading all the papers and seeing what comes down from these missions.
Love it. Okay, last question in our Fast and Light segment. What is an unbelievable science fact that still blows your mind?
That life is even a thing. Like we've done a lot of work to understand the origin of life, and we know a lot about terrestrial biology all the way back down to the last universal common ancestor, which is 3.8 billion years ago. But Earth started having water further back in time, and there's this chasm of knowledge between, I think I said before, like these early geochemical reactions to this chemical system capable of Darwinian evolution, and so like that blows my mind that actually occurred. Biology is so incredibly complex. How did that happen? Just blows my mind just thinking about it right now.
I love it. All right, Sanjoy, now is the time for our audience Q&A.
Yes.
To our audience who are watching live right now, thank you so much for hanging out with us. I'm sorry it took so long to get to your questions, but we have a bunch of them. And so I'm very excited right now to share some of these with you. I'm going to start off with one that came in from Twitter, actually, before the show. This one is from Dr. Jim Pass. Jim has asked, how much do you endeavor to involve students in the social sciences and humanities during your astrobiology public outreach activities? How important is it to increase collaboration with them?
Oh, quite. Like one of the statements I make all the time when I give public talks is that the quest to understand life in the universe is fundamental to understand who we are as humans, right? And the reason is as follows: like, if we are indeed alone in the universe, that means that we are the guardians of intelligence. And that's one hell of a responsibility to hold, right? And I'm not sure we're ready for that. Conversely, if we're not alone, then what does it mean to be human, right? Will it take the discovery of extraterrestrials to have humanity see itself as humans first and foremost before a collection of races? And, if there is indeed life elsewhere, the trivialities of conflict on Earth seems just crazy to think about it. And so, like, I think many of us are, particularly world leaders, are stuck in their own ways in seeing themselves as more important than their neighbors. Whereas astrobiology also teaches us that we are related, completely related. In fact, all of us who are on this call had literal ancestors who were building the pyramids. All of us on this call who have seen images of handprints on the Neolithic walls with ochre around it. All of us can relate ourselves directly to these people, right? We're all brothers and sisters. We're all connected. And this realization that comes from astrobiology, I think, is really important to communicate. And I do that in my presentation. So absolutely, the social sciences have their space. I wish we could offer more social science projects in our young scientist program. It'll come. Just the community we've been able to build so far has been mainly scientists and science communicators, but it'll come. It's part of the discipline is the social sciences.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about the sociology of finding alien life now. Rahul Mira on YouTube has asked, how do you think the world and United Nations would react if discovery of life outside Earth is confirmed one day?
It's going to be, I think the emotions are going to be all over the map. Some people are going to be terrified. Some people are going to be extremely excited about it. I hope it's going to bring people together. Realizing that, wow, so we have to represent ourselves well, hopefully, to these alien species. We have to not, load ourselves with weapons, which is what humanity has tended to do when faced with people that did not recognize. Hopefully, we can learn from our history and behave differently. But yeah, there's no way to predict. I think it's going to be the full spectrum of emotions are what's going to be happening when we do indeed make first contact.
I love it. So let's switch gears. This next question comes from user Tesselated on YouTube. They ask, what are good strategies to communicate complex research topics to the general public that can promote interest and engagement?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's not easy to communicate science well. I recommend everybody who's interested in that to actually train themselves to be science communicators. There are wonderful opportunities with organizations, including Bloom Rumble Space, but also the Alan Alda organization, to learn, and AGU, the American Geophysical Union, and a bunch of others who give workshops on how to communicate science, because you don't want to dumb it down, right? That's the meaning. You want to explain it in using analogies or using excitement, and people might not understand everything, but if they sense that it's exciting, they will be excited as well. I'm sure you've had a class in school where the professor is just not engaged, despite how exciting the topic is. And if they're not engaged, then you kind of lose excitement. But if the topic talks about something esoteric, but they're really into it, like you're into it as well. Right? So science communication is not just the skills of putting words together to explain a difficult concept. There's also the whole approach you take to communicating that science. And that's skills that are trainable. And so, not everybody, we're not born science communicators, right? You can train that. And so going through these workshops to improve those skills is the best way to learn the methodologies to then explain more and more complex topics. And it takes practice, right? That's the only way you get to Carnegie Hall is practice, practice, practice.
Absolutely, yeah. Practice and work. It takes work to do anything well.
That's right.
We have another question from Rahul Mira. I think I'll answer this one. We discussed earlier, you told us, that water by itself is not habitable, that we're looking, at the energetics of the systems that we have, these watery systems. Rahul wanted to know why we're fixated on this idea that water is essential for life, and if there's any theoretical basis for that belief. Rahul, you're very right. We have thought a lot about, water as the solvent for life and life being carbon-based. There is certainly other chemistry out there. There are other possible solvents that a living system could potentially use. And there's other possible backbones for life as well. Maybe it's silicon-based life people have talked about. I'll throw a question back at you, though, and give you some homework if you don't mind. I'd love it if you would go out and research a little bit about water's chemistry, especially things like the hydrogen bonding inside of water and why water is the solvent for life as we know it. And the same thing for carbon as well. There's actually a reason that carbon is a much better backbone for life as we know it than silicon is. So it's worth putting some of the work in yourself and exploring this topic a little bit. I can say that you're right. There are reasons to explore other possibilities. But so far as we know, life is based in water and with carbon. So Sanjoy, for you, we have another question from Twitter from Sibsankar Palit. Sibsankar has asked if you have suggestions for a young aspiring spacepreneur who wants to build a youth-led astrobiology and space nonprofit that can empower unserved communities around the world, just like Blue Marble Space has.
Find the people who are as excited as you to work on the project. But also find people who have the skills to also do, and the motivation to do the drudgery part of running a business. Get somebody who's excited about accounting. Get something who's excited about the law. How do you set up a business? What are all the different paperwork you need to file yearly to make sure that your nonprofit stays an entity, right? It's a lot of dedication to topics that are not necessarily exciting from a science perspective to keep a business going. It's a huge learning curve that I encourage you to follow if business is something that excites you. But it can take you away from the science. And so be very, very mindful whether starting a business is what you want to do. You don't need to start a business to build a community, right? You only need to start a business once you're doing transaction financially in order to stay, legal. But you don't need to start a business to build a community. You can do that just with an email group or however else you can think of to build community. It is taxing to start a business. It is taxing to run a business. Some days are better than others in terms of the anxiety, in terms of the drudgery, in terms of I still have this form to file. And as a leader of business, there's nobody really can help you solve the problem. You have to solve it yourself. And that can be emotionally draining as well. However, if you're able to then take a step back and see the bigger picture, then that provides all the motivation, the reasons why you do all this. But think very carefully before you start a business that it's something you want to do, because there's a lot of work behind it.
Indeed. Now, one thing I do love about our show, in our audience Q&A, we often have questions that are very targeted towards our guest. Sometimes we just have random questions about astrobiology. And so feel free to say that you have no idea of the answers for some of these questions. But user Laura Siana on YouTube wants to know if you think life is possible on the night side of a tidally locked planet around an M-class star if it'd be protected from a stellar flare.
If it's tidally locked on the night side, then there is no sunlight that gets there. And I can't see how biology would survive the cold or the lack of energy. So never say never. Biology finds a way, but it's not the place I would look for first.
Okay. Love it. And then we do have to speed up a little bit, unfortunately. I'm so sorry to our audience. Thank you for all these awesome questions. I'm going to pick and choose a couple of them here myself. We have one from the Center of Astronomical Research on Twitter at UpgradeMeBB1, great username. Can studying life at extreme temperatures broaden our understanding of possible life outside of our defined Goldilocks zone or habitable zone? Is it best to look for life in Earth-like exoplanets?
Yes, I mean, the Goldilocks zone just means that water is liquid, right? And so that doesn't tell you much about anything else about biological adaptation. So understanding the extremes of life, I think, is fundamental to understanding our ability to explore locations that you wouldn't think about first. These really hot temperatures, those are only discovered in the 1970s. Like before, we thought the seafloor was barren, but no, we discovered this new source of energy, and biology somehow I think the record now is 122 degrees Celsius is for the hottest thermophiles, which is crazy numbers, right? And so let's explore this parameter space in terms of not only temperature, but salinity, pH, pressure, and what in that physical parameter space is biology capable of, because there are environments beyond Earth that are somewhere in that parameter space. And if we can establish through scientific research that biology is possible, then that opens up the scope of planets and environments that are capable of hosting life, which is fantastic.
Fantastic. As I said, I'm going to skip through a few questions here. I have one from Terry Trevino on YouTube. Terry wants to know how you think electromagnetism might have been part in kicking off the electric fields inside of cellular structures.
I have no idea.
Love it. I'm not actually sure either. There's electromagnetism, it's kind of inherent in a lot of the conduction of electricity. It'll create a magnetic field. So it's worth looking into more. User Holden Faraday asks, what is more likely to have signs of life, Enceladus or Titan?
Enceladus or Titan? Okay, those are two different worlds that are explored with different spacecraft. So Enceladus, we can probe the exhaust from the geysers, whereas on Titan, we will land on a very cold planet with liquid methane as the main cycle of liquid. Gosh, those are such two different worlds. I would still lean towards Enceladus because I'm biased towards my water rock systems as providing energy. I don't see life being comfortable in the cold temperatures of Titan, on the surface at least, in the methane or ethane lakes. I think that's not a good solvent. Very exciting place to explore, of course. And of course, we should look for biology there because it's such an important question to answer, whether or not we're alone in the universe. But I'm still leaning towards the ocean worlds, the traditional ones, Europa and Enceladus. But good question, though. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a very interesting one for sure. User Pia A asks, what do you think about the term alien? They say it seems to me it's a very loaded term, especially in this day and age. So for you, Sanjoy, what do you think of the word alien?
It depends on its usage. I agree. The reason why it's loaded, I mean, I'm an immigrant to the United States and I was considered a non-resident alien for a long time. And it was a little weird because as an astrobiologist, well, alien has a little bit different definition. And so, like it's the usage of words to classify people will offend someone somewhere. But you also have to use those words to express yourself. And so just be conscious that sometimes people might be offended, and if they are, learn why, and that can affect the way. But it's impossible to preemptively find a word that everybody will be happy with, just because we're all living in our own little world that we're not necessarily exposed to the cultures or other ways of thinking that might feel threatened by the use of the word alien or any other word that describes a population. So if you find yourself being criticized by it, learn why. And maybe that changes the way you express yourself. But it's just the world we live in today seems to be very sensitive with all these different terms, and for good reasons, as we're more and more aware of the historical baggage that some of those terms use. But the word alien doesn't bother me as much as others.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all of your answers here. To our audience who are watching, there are so many more questions. I'm sorry we could not get to them all. We did have a slightly late start in this episode, but thank you so much. If you do want to ask your questions of Sanjoy or myself, you can find us both on Twitter. Sanjoy is at Sanjoy Marcel on Twitter. I'm at Cosmobiologist. You can also find the NASA Astrobiology program at NASA Astrobio, or SeganNet at Segan.org. On Twitter, you can also search for Sanjoy online. You'll find a lot of great hits about him. There's a really awesome interview article from NASA that they did on Sanjoy fairly recently. I do want to close it out just a little bit, coming back to this idea of the one flag emblem in space. You've written 2 papers over the years kind of around this idea you've had about community and kind of building this idea of our identity together in space. You had one paper that was called An International Symbol for the Sustained Exploration of Space, talking about this idea of having one symbol together. You had a more recent paper called Common Identity as a Step to Civilization Longevity. I wonder if you can speak kind of to your vision of finding that common identity together, and will there be a third paper that kind of culminates any of this stuff, these ideas of having all of us kind of have our shared identity?
It's hard to do it in short time, but the one thing I can say is that the beauty in humanity lies in its diversity. We learn so much more about ourselves, about the way we believe, by taking the time to engage with people who don't think like us, believe like us, or look like us. And thinking as ourselves as humans first and foremost provides the opportunity to start that conversation. Right? You need something in common, usually, to start a conversation with somebody that's very different than you. And sometimes that's the barrier, right? I don't know what we have in common or know how to start a conversation, but like, hey, look at the Earth. What do you think? And that's like, we both can relate. So it's a conversation starter. So the first paper is really emphasizing the fact that we are humans first and foremost. Second paper is really emphasizing that this diversity is really important in improving who we are as humans. And I'm not sure where the third one will go. But I mean, as I learn to engage with people that are not like me, I get new ideas on how we can come together as a society, which is really, really important because of all the challenges we face environmentally and geopolitically.
Oh, that's wonderful. We are going to close out the show now. I do want to say, Sanjoy, a special thank you to you for joining us here for Ask an Astrobiologist. You've been a great friend, a mentor, a boss over the years. I'm so honored and thrilled to be part of Blue Marble Space and SegNet and to be part of this show. And really, it's because of you and the vision that you've had and bringing me and so many of us together and allowing us to explore our diversity and our different opinions and ideas together as an organization. You've done so much for young people around the world to bring them into this. And for our audience watching, I know there's a lot of undergraduate and graduate students from around the world who are watching right now who want to be part of this journey. So if you do want to keep up with what we're doing in NASA Astrobiology, you can use the QR code popping up on the screen right now to sign up for the NASA Astrobiology mailing list. Of course, you can find more information about Blue Marble Space and BMSIS at bluemarblespace.org or at bmsis.org. It's always fun to hear from all of you who watch the show. And again, if you do want to ask more of your questions of any of us, you can find us all online in many places. And Sanjoy, I actually have one small request.
Sure.
So when you first started closing out the show for Ask an Astrobiologist, you'd always say, until next time, stay curious. And I stole that from you, and I've been doing it for a long time. I wonder, since we have you back, would you mind closing us out?
Thank you so much for asking. Oh my gosh, it's fantastic. Friends, it's been an incredible episode. Please don't forget to catch us next time on Ask An Astrobiologist. Until then, stay curious. Bye-bye.